My name is Emily Carter, and from the outside, my life seemed perfect. I had everything a woman could dream of: a prestigious job, a beautiful home, and a stable marriage with a man I once loved with all my heart. I'm 32 years old and work as a professor of English literature at one of the top universities in Chicago. My love for books began in childhood. While other girls imagined themselves as princesses in lavish castles, I dreamed of teaching at a university, sharing my passion for literature. My career was thriving, students respected me, colleagues valued my work, and my lectures always filled the auditorium. My husband, Daniel, was 3 years older than me. He worked as an attorney at a large law firm and was always busy. We met in college, and our romance seemed perfect. Deep conversations until dawn, traveling together, spontaneous kisses in the rain. He was ambitious, charismatic, and confident. Everything that drew me to him. When we got married, our life felt like a fairy tale. We bought a beautiful home in a quiet neighborhood, decorated it together, filling it with photos, books, and memories. We dreamed of children, of a future that felt so certain and secure, but over the years, something changed. Daniel started working more, staying late, traveling for business. At first, I understood. His career demanded sacrifices. But then, the distance between us became the norm. Dinners turned into short conversations about work. Hugs became rare gestures of affection. And the passion that once bound us disappeared somewhere between meeting schedules and endless responsibilities. I couldn't say I was unhappy. I had everything: stability, status, respect. But deep down, I felt like I had become just another part of a well-constructed mechanism called marriage. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who had forgotten what it felt like to be desired, to feel a shiver from a touch, to be alive. I never planned to cheat. But perhaps the most dangerous decisions come in moments when you don't even realize that something inside you has already changed forever. His name was Liam Henderson. He was one of the most talented students in my contemporary literature course. 22 years old, a time when a person is still full of youthful idealism yet mature enough to see the world a little deeper. I noticed him in the very first week of class. He wasn't like the other students, who simply sat through lectures, jotting down only the bare minimum. Liam listened intently, almost too intently. His eyes were always fixed on me, and when I spoke, it felt as if everyone else in the room ceased to exist for him. He asked questions that made me think. His reflections on literature were deeper than most of his peers. He didn't just understand what was written in the text. He saw what lay between the lines. His analysis was always insightful, often more thoughtful than even some of my colleagues. At first, I saw him as nothing more than a gifted student. But then, I started noticing the little things. How he always arrived a little early and took a seat in the front row, as close to the podium as possible. How his gaze lingered on me when I explained a concept. How his lips twitched into a faint smile whenever I caught him staring too intently. I didn't want to believe there was any tension between us. It was absurd. I was his professor. I was married. I had a stable life. But then came that night. Late October. The campus was quiet. I had stayed behind after lectures, grading student papers in my classroom. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from the desk lamp on my table. I was just finishing up the last of the term papers when I heard a soft knock on the door. "Come in," I said, without looking up from the papers. The door creaked open, and I heard a familiar voice. "Professor Carter?" I lifted my head. Liam stood in the doorway, his hand still resting on the doorknob, as if he were hesitating, unsure whether he should step inside. "Liam?" I was slightly surprised. "Is something wrong?" He nodded and quietly shut the door behind him. "I wanted to talk about my paper. I need your help." I glanced at the clock. It was already late, but I couldn't just turn him away. "All right, have a seat," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. He sat down, but he didn't take out any papers. Instead, he just looked at me. "So what's your topic?" I asked, trying to keep my voice professional. "Forbidden feelings in literature," he answered after a pause. I felt my heart make a strange movement in my chest. "That's a broad topic," I said, flipping through the list of student assignments. "Do you have a specific example?" He nodded. "Yes. I'm interested in how characters hide from real life in forbidden relationships, how it gives them a sense of freedom, even when they know it's wrong. I froze. It could have been a coincidence, just a research paper, just a literary analysis. But his eyes, they looked at me in a way a student shouldn't look at his professor. It's an interesting choice. I adjusted my posture in my chair, trying to ignore the fact that the atmosphere in the room had shifted. Liam leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the edge of my desk. Have you ever thought about it, Professor? I felt my body tense. About what? About what makes people cross the line. I forced myself to smile. I think about it from a literary perspective, if that's what you mean. His lips twitched into a slight smile, but he said nothing. I didn't know what else to say. I didn't know how to end this conversation without making it even more uncomfortable. And then he leaned in a little closer. What if not just from a literary perspective? My breath caught. This was the line. A thin, dangerous line that I had to cross one way or stay safely on the other. I could have stood up, asked him to leave, shut this conversation down before it became something it shouldn't, but instead I held my breath, feeling the tension in the air thicken between us. I knew I should have stopped this before it went too far, but instead I just looked at him, and in that moment, everything was decided. I tried to forget that conversation. Days passed, and I acted as if nothing had happened. In class, Liam was the same as always, intelligent, attentive, charismatic. It seemed as though that night had been nothing more than a figment of my imagination. That the line we had almost crossed remained untouched, but that was a lie. I noticed how his gaze lingered on me longer than it should have, how his smile became just barely perceptible when he caught me looking back. This was a game, and we both knew the rules. I kept telling myself it was just a student's infatuation, that he was young, drawn to the thrill of something forbidden, and I had simply been caught in the pull of his impulse, but something else was growing inside me. Not just curiosity, not just desire, but a real hunger for something new, for something that made me feel alive. It was an ordinary evening. Once again, I had stayed late at work, grading student papers in my classroom. The lights were dim, the campus nearly empty. The silence was calming until a soft knock on the door broke it. I knew who it was before I even looked up. Professor Carter. His voice was low, quiet, dangerous. I inhaled deeply, forcing myself not to react. Liam, what are you doing here? He closed the door behind him. I've been thinking about our conversation. You said it was the wrong conversation, but if that's true, why didn't you stop it? I opened my mouth to argue, to say that we couldn't do this. But then he stepped closer, just a few steps, but enough to make every ounce of logic in my mind dissolve into thin air. You shouldn't be here, I whispered. But I am, because I want this, and so do you. My fingers trembled. His hand reached out slowly, stopping just at my wrist. A soft, barely there touch. I could have pulled away. I should have told him no, but I didn't. When his lips met mine, everything else disappeared. Daniel was gone. Right and wrong no longer existed. There was only this moment. His kisses weren't hesitant or unsure. They were deliberate. The way a man kisses, not a boy. He knew what he wanted, and he wanted me. I let myself sink into that desire. His hands slid around my waist, pulling me closer. I perched on the edge of the desk, feeling my body tremble, not from fear, but from adrenaline, from risk, from the passion I had been starving for. We knew this was forbidden, that if anyone caught us, it would be a disaster. But that only made it more intoxicating. I didn't stop. I didn't want to stop. I had already made my choice, and now there was no turning back. His breath was warm, his hands confident. I could feel the blood pulsing through my veins, my heart pounding in a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My hands reached for him on their own, fingers digging into his shoulders as if trying to anchor myself in a reality that was rapidly spinning out of control. In this darkened classroom, where, during the day, intellectual debates on classical literature unfolded, now everything was dictated by nothing but raw, physical desire. The desk, once a place for my papers and lectures, became the boundary that no longer existed. Liam pressed closer, his hands tightening around my waist. his lips trailing down my neck, slowing as if savoring every inch of skin. "You have no idea how long I've wanted this," he whispered. I clutched his shirt, burying my face against his chest. "This is a mistake." I exhaled, but even I couldn't believe my own words. His lips found mine again, deeper, hungrier. A mistake? Maybe? But it was the only thing that made me feel alive. His hands roamed over my body, pausing at my hips before sliding higher, bolder now. I let my head fall back, surrendering to the moment, to the feeling, to the fire consuming me. No one could ever know. It was just a moment, just this night. But somewhere deep inside, I already knew. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. I sat at my desk, trying to catch my breath. The scent of his cologne still lingered in the dimly lit classroom, mixing with my own. The silence was almost suffocating after everything that had just happened. Liam stood by the door, buttoning his shirt, his gaze never leaving me. "Do you regret it?" His voice was low, warm, without the boldness it had held before. I didn't answer right away. My fingers trembled as I ran them through my hair, trying to steady my thoughts. "I don't know," I admitted, avoiding his eyes. "Regret, number fear. Yes." I closed my eyes, trying to make sense of it all. What had I done? I had just shattered everything I had spent years building. But when I finally looked up at him again, confident, unburdened, young, alive, I couldn't bring myself to feel true remorse. He leaned in slightly. "This isn't over, Professor Carter. You know that." I swallowed hard. "Go, Liam," I whispered. He smiled. "See you tomorrow," and then he was gone. I remained there, sitting among scattered papers, broken morals, and a heartbeat that pounded wildly in my chest. I should have felt guilty. I should have. But instead, I just leaned my head back and closed my eyes. Because the truth was, I had already crossed the line. And once you cross it, there's no going back.